नमस्कार, स्वागत है आपका राज्यसभा टेलीविजन पर। मैं हूं आरफा खानम शेरवानी और हम इस वक्त मुंबई में मौजूद हैं बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज पर। सुबह से ही आपके लिए तमाम वो खबरें और आंकड़न लेकर आ रहे हैं जो यूनियन बजट पेश हुआ है उसका तमाम पहलू पर नजर डालने की कोशिश करें और अगले आधे घंटे हम इस बात पर कोशिश करेंगे कि आपको तमाम वो मुद्दे समझाएं जिसमें खासकर जो कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर है देश का वो क्या सोच रहा है नरेंद्र मोदी के बजट के बारे में। अरुण जेटली ने जो अपने ब्रीफ केस में जो कुछ उनके लिए लेकर आए हैं क्या वो कॉर्पोरेट इंडिया को पसंद आए, लेकिन कुछ और पहलुओं पर भी नजर डालने की कोशिश करेंगे। मेरे साथ ही गोविंद भी मेरे साथ मौजूद रहेंगे। मेरे साथ है फिलहाल मेहमान रोहन शाह जो कि मैनेजिंग पार्टनर हैं इकोनॉमिक लॉज प्रैक्टिस के। इसके अलावा विमल भंडारी हैं MD एंड CEO हैं इंडो स्टार कैपिटल फाइनेंस लिमिटेड। दिनेश कानाबार हैं डेप्यूटी CEO और चेयरमैन हैं KPMG के। तीनों मेहमानों का बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। सबसे पहले रोहन आपके साथ शुरुआत करना चाहती हूँ कि ये भी कहा जाता है कि कॉर्पोरेट्स के मोदी जो है नरेंद्र मोदी वो डार्लिंग रहे हैं, क्या आपको अभी भी इतना ही प्यार है उनसे, उनकी इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी से इस बजट को सुनने के बाद?
Absolutely. I think it's a budget where you can criticize things, but it is a forward-looking budget. It's a strong budget, and more so, it's a budget which talks of detail and also points, I think, to the factor that good governance will be required to deliver what is the economic agenda. And given that good governance is the forte of the Prime Minister, I believe that there is no falling out of love. अभी भी प्यार बरकरार है।
बढ़ तो नहीं गया?
बढ़ेगा, but I think it will be in very slow degrees as benefits become more apparent. There is a lot of detailing in this budget which is very, very noteworthy. A lot of people have not had time to digest that fully. So I think
कुछ 5 पॉइंट्स बताना पसंद करेंगे?
दिन ब दिन प्यार बढ़ते
प्यार तो बढ़ रहा है, लेकिन कुछ 5 पॉइंट्स हमारे दर्शकों के लिए बताइए और बाकी लोग भी देख रहे हैं कि जो ऐसे 5 पॉइंट जो पॉलिसी में आप शिफ्ट देख रहे हैं जिससे कि जो कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर है उसको बढ़ावा मिले या जो एक स्टिमुलस देने की बात हो रही थी वो क्या मिल पाया है?
So if you analyze 3 or 4 of the main sectors, and this goes back to your 5 points, one issue was in terms of the impetus for investment, both domestic and FDI. And very clearly you are seeing that there are specific schemes and facilitations in relation to a series of industries. So for FDI you are seeing quite clearly real estate sector is considerably going to benefit. There are new changes in terms of which smaller projects can also now be financed by foreign direct investment. You are seeing an opening up of opportunities in insurance. You are seeing an opening up of opportunities in other sectors.
Defense.
So quite clearly you are in a situation where there is going to be a far better regime in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. Secondly, you are seeing a situation where a lot of infrastructure has got very detailed attention. So if you look at just the transportation sector, there is something for airports, there is something for ports, there is for roads, there is in terms of warehousing. Every facet in terms of what is required has been looked at. Likewise, you see the whole energy sector, the oil and gas sector. A lot of detailing has gone into what could be the very largest projects. Which will get the highest investment and generate the greatest employment.
इससे पहले कि गोविंद अपने सवालों के साथ आगे बढ़े, एक सवाल मैं पूछना चाहती हूँ विमल भंडारी, ये बताइए कि जहाँ तक जो फिस्कल डेफिसिट का बार बार जिक्र हो रहा है, फिस्कल डेफिसिट जो कि लगातार ये मांग रही कॉर्पोरेट्स की ही कि इसको कम किया जाए ताकि उनका फायदा बढ़ सके, ताकि एक बेहतर माहौल बन सके, एक बेहतर इमेज बिल्डिंग इंटरनेशनली भी हो सके, इन्वेस्टर आए, लेकिन क्या ये प्रैक्टिकल है? जो उन्होंने इस बार जो चैलेंज एक्सेप्ट किया है उसकी तो तारीफ की जानी चाहिए, लेकिन हर साल वो कम करते जाएंगे, कैसे होगा ये कम?
नहीं, देखिए, मूविंग फॉरवर्ड जो फिस्कल डेफिसिट है जो कम करने की बात है वो इकोनॉमी का जैसे एक्सपेंशन होएगा तभी फिस्कल डेफिसिट कम हो सकता है। जैसे जेटली साहब ने अपने ओपनिंग रिमार्क्स में कहा था, फिस्कल डेफिसिट कम करने के लिए या तो खर्चे कम करो या रेवेन्यू बढ़ाओ, और उन्होंने कंप्लीट फोकस रेवेन्यू बढ़ाने के ऊपर दी है। सो मूविंग फॉरवर्ड कि इस साल भी बिना एक भी सब्सिडी के कट किए हुए उन्होंने बोला है कि मैंने चैलेंज एक्सेप्ट किया कि मैं 4.1% पे ले आऊँगा, ऑल्दो 4.5% की आशा थी। पर अगर ये एक्सपेंशन इकोनॉमी का होता है, बिकॉज जो उन्होंने इन्वेस्टमेंट साइकिल को रीस्टार्ट करने की बात की है, तो द पॉसिबिलिटी कि ये फिस्कल डेफिसिट का जो उन्होंने 3 साल का टारगेट नंबर्स दिए हैं गोइंग राइट अप टू 3%, is very much feasible.
लेकिन काफी इस बात को लेकर शोर था कि डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट होगा, भारी पैमाने पर होगा, लेकिन ये शब्द भी सुनने को नहीं मिला।
उन्होंने समझ में ये आ रहा है कि स्पीच में नहीं कहा था, पर फाइन प्रिंट में उन्होंने डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट का काफी बड़ा नंबर लिया है।
तो राजनीतिक कारण है इसके कि शायद इस शब्द को बहुत दो महीने पुरानी सरकार है,
या तो एक्सपेक्टेशन क्योंकि पूरे बजट में डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट का इनडायरेक्ट कहीं पहलू है, तो खाली बैंकों का शेयर स्मॉल इन्वेस्टर्स को देने की बात थी, उसके अलावा he has not talked of disinvestment at all.
And how do you see the target, the size, 63,000 crores?
That's fairly feasible because, you know, in some of the higher core sector industries like ONGC, Indian Oil and all, there's a very good appetite at the investor level. And our expectation is that towards the third quarter and, you know, when the government starts wanting to disinvest, the market is in a buoyant mood. The general feeling both at the retail investor level and now with the FII, कि एक जो FII वालों को थोड़ी हमेशा चिंता रहती थी अपने टैक्स ट्रीटमेंट की, that also they have clarified in this budget. So achieving that number on the groundswell of where we are seems eminently doable.
Right. Dinesh, let me come to the one tricky question perhaps of this budget. What did he exactly say about retrospective tax? And what did he intend to do, or does he intend to do?
So, Govind, if I may just care to first clarify, there is nothing like a retrospective tax. What really happened was that the law was amended retrospectively, as a result of which a transaction got taxed. And there are 3 or 4 points which he made. The first point which he made was to say the government as a sovereign has a right to impose a tax retrospectively. And I don't think anybody can deny that.
And that's also stating the obvious.
Absolutely. Second, the point which he made was to say that, however, doing such a thing is really going back on a commitment. It is not at all inducive to foreign investment, and therefore it ought to be avoided. And therefore, he made 2 or 3 propositions. His first proposition was that insofar as the amendment of 2012 is concerned, there are issues which have gone beyond that amendment. So there's international arbitration, there are court cases which are pending, and he says that the matters will achieve their logical conclusion. I don't necessarily totally agree with him, but that's a position which has been taken thus far. And what he has said is that if there are any new matters which are coming up, qua the retrospective amendment a la Vodafone, then those will be referred to a high-level committee, and only then will it be taken ahead. I think that that committee probably is superficial for a very simple reason, that whatever matters are there are already in litigation today. So in a sense, he has not addressed that issue whole hog. Then he has given a statement of intent to say that going forward we will not have retrospective amendment, and that is manifested by the fact that all the amendments
which are going forward, does he mean this government or all governments, or can he speak for all governments?
It's not put by way of a law. Okay. And I would have actually wished that he would have enacted, as it is in some of the other countries like Brazil, that the government will not change law except for a year back or whatever, in a situation of tax evasion.
So what's the comfort that you're getting at the end of all of this? Because this was a big issue going in, right? Foreign investors are worried about investing in India because this whole thing is hanging there.
The only comfort which one can get at this stage is that the finance minister on the floor of the parliament has said that he will not, while he is the finance minister and while this government is in place, will not enact anything retrospectively or will not modify anything retrospectively. There's only one manifestation which is quite positive, which is there are a number of amendments brought about by this budget. Some of them are really to go back on some of the court decisions. So very specifically, there are 2 or 3 amendments which actually reverse court cases, but they have not gone retrospective, which would ordinarily have happened. They are all prospective. So that intent which was stated is actually been implemented, at least in this budget. As I said, it would have been much better had a framework been laid down, a legislative framework, and one of them.
Can you give us one of these examples? You said 2.
Sorry?
Can you give us an example of this?
So for example, there is this issue on transfer pricing as to what constitutes a deemed international transaction. So in a certain situation, a transaction between residents can be regarded as a deemed international transaction. Okay. That was the view which was taken by a tribunal to say that unless one of the parties is non-resident, a transaction cannot be deemed international transaction. Now they have clarified the law. Ordinarily, it would have been brought about as a clarificatory amendment right from the day on which the law was enacted.
So what's the spirit? I mean, how do I interpret this spirit?
The spirit is to say we will make changes, but the changes will only be prospective and not retrospective.
Okay. One broader perspective again, for our audiences, what's the spirit of tax administration that you're getting from this whole budget, both at the corporate level as well as at the individual level? Is it friendly, indifferent, adversarial, and contrasted to what it was earlier?
Yeah. in that very spirit, may I just pick up on what was said earlier, even on the retrospective amendment. My personal sense is that I don't think he shut the door on the retrospective amendment issue. I think he said that, you know, there are court cases and they will all have their own destiny, which doesn't mean that he can't intercede or that he can't take any further actions in the context of trying to address those issues. So I still think that he may have an ability to get out there and address this. And I think he understands the importance of this in terms of sentiment, in terms of foreign investment. Coming back to your issue, the talk is all about the factor that they want to reduce litigation and that they want better tax administration. Does all of this translate into the letter of what he's put in? A few things, you know, don't quite fit in. So for example, in indirect taxation, there is a requirement that you must make a statutory pre-deposit before you appeal. Now the practical impact of this is, we have seen some very adventurous and aggressive tax demands. Under the tax demand, if I had to pay 1,000 crores, I did have an opportunity to convince an authority that I should not pre-deposit even 1 rupee before you heard my appeal. Now by statute, I must pay 7.5% of the duty and the penalty. And if it is 1,000 crores of duty and 1,000 crores of penalty, that is a very large amount of money that I have to pay, even though I may be completely right. So that's one of the things which is worrying. In indirect taxes, there are a few judgments that again they have overwritten. You know, the Ram Swarup judgment which said that there is no time limit for utilization of Senmat credit. It's a right consequent to tax payment, you have the right forever. He's reduced that to 6 months. So there are a few of these which intersect, but by and large, I believe the spirit is being driven to lesser litigation and lesser interpretational divergence.
विमल भंडारी, जीएसटी को लेकर भी जो वित्त मंत्री ने कहा है, जो फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर ने कहा है कि साल के आखिर तक वो चाहेंगे कि सब कुछ स्ट्रीमलाइन हो जाए, आपको लगता है काफी एम्बिशियस है या आपको लगता है डुएबल है, हो सकता है?
I think given the current state of affairs, GST is priority number 1 in terms of unlocking the investment psyche in the animal spirit, and given the stature of Jaitley himself, not to belittle the absolute majority of this government, I think GST is finally looking like a reality.
लेकिन कहा जा रहा है कि सब कुछ उनके हाथ में नहीं है, बल्कि जो राज्य सरकारें हैं, कई सरकारें तो बिल्कुल रास्ते में खड़ी हुई हैं, उनको मना लेना, उनका रेवेन्यू कम हो जाएगा, वो सब कुछ क्या आपको लगता है इतना आसान होगा?
I think अभी क्योंकि सब रियलाइज कर रहे हैं कि बिना GST के गाड़ी आगे बढ़ नहीं सकती है, इसके लिए.
But do you think a deadline would have been useful?
It would have been, because it would have focused a lot of energies. My own feeling is maybe it didn't give the deadline because there's intervening some major elections in certain states, and therefore he did not want to overcommit himself. And maybe given the time span he has had presently.
लेकिन अगर ये इतना आसान होता तो शायद यूपीए सरकार भी ये कोशिश करती, उन्होंने भी ऑन बोर्ड लेने की कोशिश की थी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स को, लेकिन ये
इंक्रीमेंटल प्रोग्रेस हुआ था, एंड बट ऑब्वियसली जर्नी बहुत लंबी है, एंड some of the fears of the state that they will not be adequately compensated is real. But I think GST is a major game changer, so he will.
दिनेश खानाबार, एक और महत्वपूर्ण सवाल जो कि मैं राजनीतिक लिहाज से भी पूछना चाहती हूँ, वो ये कि पॉलिसी पैरालिसिस, बार बार ये शब्द हमें सुनने को मिला, और बड़ी वजह ये रही बहुत सारी वजहों में से, जिससे कि कांग्रेस पार्टी को हार का सामना करना पड़ा, कि उनका ये कहना था कि जो विकास के पहिए हैं वो पूरी तरह से जैम हो गए हैं और ब्यूरोक्रेसी ने बिल्कुल काम करना बंद कर दिया है. मोदी सरकार में रातों रात ऐसा क्या बदल गया या ऐसा क्या बदल जाएगा कि ये पॉलिसी पैरालिसिस खत्म हो जाएगा, कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर खुश हो जाएगा, कारोबार आगे बढ़ जाएगा और विकास के पथ पर जो है देश चलने लगेगा?
In a very simple situation, what we are looking at is, you look at power projects which could not be implemented because coal was something separate and was not fitting into the power. And now when you sort of make a single ministry, you are really making it a seamless affair. Just giving you one example. Or for example, we had this whole issue on EOGMs, and which was becoming really a center of bureaucracy. EOGMs were created so that at a single point you could clear everything. Actually what in effect happened was that EOGMs became a barrier to any decisions being taken. Again, the abolition of EOGMs. So that obviously that's not a budget issue really, but really when you announce projects, you say that those clearances will be available to you on the tap. And when you go and say that here is a funding mechanism that I'm going to create. So there was a point which was made earlier with which I totally agree, that it is one rare budget where one is seeing a policy being put together and then a roadmap to implementation of that policy. That is what will unclog everything and will allow the investments to happen.
So, but are you saying you see that roadmap, or you don't see that?
I absolutely see that roadmap.
Okay.
And Govind, if I could just take back a little bit further from what Rohan mentioned to your question as to does one see an adversarial regime here, or does one see something coming unclogging? And from a direct tax perspective, I think I would be failing if I don't make this point. I have very rarely seen such a positive set of provisions. So what is the biggest issue which multinationals face in India? Transfer pricing. And what does the finance minister say? He says, if you have done an advance pricing agreement, I will roll it forward by 4 years. Meaning that an advance pricing agreement is valid for a period of 9 years. Number one. Number two, the biggest amount of litigation was because today when you did a pricing, you took an arithmetical mean, which was a very difficult thing to comply with, is now putting a range. To my mind, that and a couple of other provisions, I won't go into the details, just these provisions will almost entirely kill the transfer pricing litigation.
So he did talk about litigation and the 4 lakh crores locked. I mean, now many finance ministers have talked about that too. I mean, but there seems to be again an implementation jam when it comes to actually getting these cases thrown out or removed from the courts.
So two parts to it.
Courts.
Yeah. So two parts to it. You know,
because a lot of it is really someone like me waiting for my refund to come, which doesn't come because of some other reason.
So I can share this with you. I was just looking in a different perspective, sitting with a chief commissioner in Bombay, trying to really look at some of the amounts which are shown as outstanding. And you will not believe, in a particular range where there's about 12,000 crores of rupees shown as recoverable, more than 11,500 crores were actually mismatches. So credit being given for a particular year whereas being asked for another year, etc. So I don't know how much of this 4 lakh crore is indeed recoverable. Again, the government is known to be the biggest litigant today. And the track record of the government in succeeding in cases has been very pathetic. You know, Rohan earlier mentioned about the fact that there are high pitch assessments, and how many of them stand, and which is very deplored, this requirement to deposit taxes. One other provision which I think is very salutary is regarding authority for advance rulings. So today the issue is, there is a dispute which arises and it takes me about 20 years before I get a resolution. The authority for advance ruling is meant today only for non-resident. Unfortunately, there is only single bench. More often than not, it does not even have a chairman, and if there is a chairman, he is not a full-time person. And what the finance minister has said is that first, all residents will also be eligible to apply to authority for advance ruling, subject of course to an income criteria.
Okay. So that also, sort of, to simplify it quickly, that also fits into what Rohan is saying. Basically, the regime of being more friendly and wanting to resolve
I would
problems,
very much think so.
Make life simpler. Rohan?
Absolutely. And you know, don't only hear the voice of the finance minister. The Attorney General has said 4 weeks ago that one of his key areas of thrust is to ensure that every matter is not appealed to the Supreme Court. Now you have to see this finally as a government where different people in responsibility speak in unison and repeat the same message. And that is really heartening. To the point which was made earlier, why is there a renewed hope? The renewed hope is different people are saying the same thing in terms of what is their focal point. And reducing tax litigation being a focal point. Your law officer, the senior most law officer, is also endorsed.
बिल्कुल बात हो रही है कि ग्रुप ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स को डिसबैंड कर दिया गया है और एक काफी स्ट्रीमलाइन चीजें हो गई हैं, लेकिन जिस तेजी के साथ एनवायरमेंट क्लियरेंसेस मिलने शुरू हुए हैं, हो सकता है ये सवाल आपको बहुत पसंद ना आए, लेकिन पूछा जाना बहुत जरूरी है. कहीं ना कहीं एक ये बात भी सामने उभर कर आ रही है कि कॉर्पोरेट की खातिर कहीं ना कहीं एनवायरमेंट के साथ समझौता हो रहा है, और एनवायरमेंट का मतलब सिर्फ वो लोग, सिर्फ जंगल और जमीन नहीं, बल्कि वो लोग भी हैं जो पूरे तरीके से एनवायरमेंट पे डिपेंड करते हैं. आपको नहीं लगता कि कॉर्पोरेट के खिलाफ ये जो भावना है लोगों की, ये कहीं नुकसान पहुंचा सकती है, क्योंकि कॉर्पोरेट को भी लोगों के साथ ही डील करना है?
ये जो मुद्दा है यूनिवर्सल है, and we have to draw from the history and development of other countries of how they have addressed it. And the method of addressing it is, yes, economic development and corporate activity will impact the environment. It will displace people. But ultimately people have evolved a package. And the package is a balance between what you need to do to generate jobs and how you look after those who are displaced. Either through annuity, employment, giving them a shareholder interest. There are a series of things. We are not the first nation facing this. But we are the first nation who does this constantly under the glare of public interest litigation. And because it goes to a court, it ultimately has a 8-10 year lifespan. which
PIL ने सबसे
effectively
ज्यादा नुकसान जो है वो कारोबारियों को पहुंचाया है, PIL कल्चर ने.
absolutely, which blocks your project for an indefinite period of time. So if there is a mechanism which is recognized now the world over that all these elements can be addressed and we stop abdicating all decisions to courts, because I think there was a phase where only Supreme Court took decisions, nobody else took decisions. If Supreme Court does not have to take those decisions and government takes them, then it is possible and historically proven that you can take care of the poor, the displaced, the weaker sections and still create a positive situation.
Viman, how do you see that?
No, I think I would tend to completely agree with Rohan. The entire environment debate got somewhat out of hand in India. There have been wrongdoings, one doesn't dispute that. But the mitigation and the amelioration does not mean that you drag them through courts and then you come with a land acquisition bill which basically helps no one.
What's your sense on the land acquisition bill? And you think...
Based on the current bill, it is humanly impossible to acquire any sizable piece of land to do any project. The good part is that at least now the government has started listening and understanding that it needs to be modified. What form and fashion it will take, because there are different interest groups which need to be addressed. But earlier it is done, the better it is, because if
लेकिन आपको लगता है कि हिम्मत होगी सरकार की, जिस तरह का राजनीतिक माहौल है, हर 6 महीने बाद चुनाव है, ऐसे में लोगों को नाखुश कर कारोबारियों की चिंता ठीक है, लेकिन वोट तो लोगों से मिलना है.
उसमें आई थिंक प्रोसेस के अंदर उनको चेंज करना पड़ेगा ताकि लोगों का जो इकोनॉमिक गेन है वो अफेक्ट नहीं हो. तो आज जो प्रोसेस है वो इम्पॉसिबल है इम्प्लीमेंट करने की.
लेकिन जिस मैंडेट के साथ ये सरकार आई है, आपको लगता है जितनी तेजी से चीजें आगे बढ़ रही हैं वो सही है कि कारोबार जगत को ये अच्छा लगेगा, लेकिन आपको नहीं लगता कि कहीं ना कहीं लोगों में, जो यूपीए सरकार ने भी एक तरह से कोशिश की थी, एक के बाद एक मंत्री बदल के, ऐसा नहीं है कारोबारियों को फायदा पहुंचाने की, उन्होंने भी कोशिश की थी, एनवायरमेंट मिनिस्टर एक के बाद हमने देखा कि हर कुछ महीने पे मिनिस्टर बदल रहे थे, वो काम नहीं किया. लेकिन आपको लगता है कि ये सरकार, क्या आपका कॉन्फिडेंस है कि एक बीच का रास्ता लेने में कामयाब होगी, जिस तरह से रोहन शाह कह रहे थे कि ऐसा रास्ता जिसमें एनवायरमेंट और कारोबार दोनों साथ साथ चल सकें?
मेरे ख्याल से 100% वो करेंगे, बिकॉज उनका जो विजन स्टेटमेंट है और जो ऑब्वियसली रोजगार बढ़ाने की बात है, इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन बढ़ाने की बात है, हर एक आदमी जानता है कि बिना जमीन के ये पॉसिबल नहीं है और ये कोई सत्य है. दिस कैन नॉट चेंज ओवरनाइट. So we have to find the best possible solution. Other economies, other countries have done it. It's not that we are unique to the problem.
लेकिन उन देशों ने कीमत भी अदा की है, ऐसा नहीं है. अमेरिका से लेकर और जितने भी विकासशील देश हैं उनकी बात हम कर रहे हैं.
But I think इंडिया के अंदर एक तो मीडिया हाइप ज्यादा हो गया, कोर्ट हाइप ज्यादा हो गया, सरकार थोड़ी अपनी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी एब्डिकेट कर दी. I think अब थोड़ा बैलेंस आने लगा है.
Rohan, I think is itching to get in.
No, the only point is, and this is something I'm drawing both from the railway budget and today's budget. There is clearly an attempt by ministers to talk to the whole nation in terms of great detail. A lot of people said, what sort of a budget it is? 1 minute he talks of 10,000 crores, फिर कहीं 25 करोड़ की बात कर रहे हैं. But it is an attempt to talk in detail to the nation. This is the exact issue that you need also in terms of environment. To talk to people, impacted people, those who are NGOs, to say that in this particular project, this is what the nation gains, this is what the people affected gain, and yes, if somebody is going to make an investment, he will also gain. But as long as everybody gains and we can transparently project that, then we really have a scope for far greater progress on this. And the way they have started, which is far greater transparency than we ever knew before.
लेकिन सरकार ने चार्ज लेते ही जिस तरह से निशाना बनाया है एनजीओस को, आपको लगता है ये कारोबारियों के हित में जा रहा है? धीरे धीरे एक एक करके एनजीओस को निशाना बनाया गया है.
Not that, you know, I think NGOs have a great resilience and the courts have a great fondness for the good causes that an NGO brings. So I think that balance in our system will remain. Nobody is going to be able to discount a good cause before a good judge. That will always have an impact in this country. But if the good judge also understands that this is something transparent, he is less suspicious. The NGO is less suspicious. But if you still are promoting a bad cause, you must suffer. But you shouldn't suffer because you are not transparent.
And as you become a more participative democracy, I guess that is exactly what you would expect.
To refine the new equilibrium.
Right. So, Dinesh, I mean, as, just to come back to the broader theme, right? This was supposed to talk about more business. What's the takeaway for business? What's it going to be like for markets who will feed capital to business? How are we going into the next few months?
So, couple of things. First of all, there is, as we discussed, an attempt to be more transparent, an attempt to get a buy-in. There has always been this pendulum theory. So we were at one end of laissez-faire, we moved into a total a situation where everything was under sort of stymied and not allowed to go forward. We are getting somewhere back to normal, and I don't think we need to get worried about that situation, that merely because pendulum is coming to the center, that means that we are going to disregard interest of various people. Again, look at what did you hear from the finance minister. Repeatedly he spoke about inclusive growth. He did not speak about growth. So while the election manifesto would have been growth, growth and growth, what you heard today in every single statement was inclusive growth. Some of the new schemes which are announced today was also really how to get people on board. And then again we are talking about infrastructure development, which is one of the key things to how money is going to flow back into the sector, how jobs are going to be created. So when we speak about so many ports, so many airports, so much of roads, I think that's where really the investment needs to happen. We again heard a lot about PPP and really how public-private partnership is going to take the infrastructure development further. All of this to me...
It's just a small note of skepticism here. So some of these things have been also mentioned before, right? I mean, and the question is, where will the rubber meet the road and how will it...
But it's never about vision, it's always about implementation.
Right.
And that was a point which we have been discussing earlier also, that this government has come back to say, A, because it has got the majority...
No, and the only reason I'm asking is because we're reading a budget statement and all these mentions of ports and PPPs and so on, but similar mentions have been made before.
No, I understand. Right. And similar mentions have been made on disinvestment in the past.
Yes.
And you asked this question whether 63,000 crores looks good or bad. The question is, the government today has a mandate to implement.
Right. And that's the premise for a lot of other things.
That is the key thing.
मैं चाहती हूँ कि अपनी बात कहें, लेकिन समय बिल्कुल समाप्त हो चुका है, यहीं पे से खत्म करना होगा जी, आखिरी सेंटेंस.
Only one thing, we laid too much store by this budget. If this government comes through with actions, and all of this, what we are saying, is it policy or is it reality? If it is reality, the budget will become redundant in 5 years.
आखिरी सेंटेंस.
Yeah, I said, वो जो आप बोल रहे थे in terms of the performance, he is first time in the budget, he said 8,000 kilometers will be done by March.
जी हाँ. तो जिस मैंडेट के साथ ये सरकार आई है, उतना ही कॉन्फिडेंस कारोबारियों में नजर आ रहा है. उम्मीद है हम कर सकते हैं कि जो आम आदमी है, जिसकी जमीन को लेकर या जिसके जंगल को लेकर लगातार बात होती रही है, जैसे कॉर्पोरेट इंडिया वर्सेस गरीब आदमी हो, उम्मीद कर सकते हैं कि इस मैंडेट के साथ जो सरकार आई है, वो कम से कम इतना तो सुनिश्चित करे कि दोनों इसी हवा में सांस ले सकें और ग्रोथ, विकास और गरीबों के बीच में एक संतुलन जरूर बन सके. सभी मेहमानों का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. नमस्कार.